Hey, what's up everybody? It's Ryutech, and today we'll be talking about the best $1,000 gaming PC for July of 2020. $1,000 is a pretty common price point for gaming PCs and is definitely an amount that I recommend that you spend on a gaming computer. With $1,000, you are of course going to get some extreme performance. In this PC, we have a phenomenal CPU and graphics card that won't run into any bad bottlenecking or inconsistencies, but instead will give you extreme high performance. It also has 16 gigs of RAM, 1.5 terabytes of storage, all contained within its full ATX setup. Now this build is a 4K machine, so if you plan on playing some games at 4K at 60 frames per second, then it's a done deal. This computer can absolutely handle it. At other resolutions being 1440p and 1080p, of course you'll get some very high frame rates, meaning that if you want to play competitively with a 144Hz monitor, you'll likely see every single frame, even at higher graphics settings. So before we get straight into talking about the parts we'll be using, I would really appreciate it if you checked out my channel. I post PC tech videos among other things. Also, if you have any comments or questions as the video goes along, be sure to drop a comment. If you like the video, drop a like, and if you enjoy the content you're seeing, drop a sub. It really helps out the channel. Now, you can't use your PC unless you have a copy of Windows, of course. So if you need a Windows key for this build or any build, I highly recommend you head over to Digital Chill Mart. Among the other software that they sell cheap copies of Windows licenses. Use coupon code RYUTECH to get 5% off. Links in the description. Alright, so let's start with the CPU. I chose the AMD Ryzen 5 3600. It's a 6-core, 12-thread processor with a base clock of 3.6 GHz, boost clock of 4.2 GHz, is overclock ready, and of course, has that amazing 7nm Zen 2 architecture. It also comes with a stock cooler, so you won't have to worry about buying one. Now in terms of gaming, the 3600 is a very popular choice for high-end gaming because of how easily it delivers performance via its 6 cores and 12 threads, and how it is capable of high frame rate, high resolution tasks, meaning for example playing GTA 5 at 4K 60 frames per second. Overall, a really solid processor. It's almost impossible to find a review online saying that this is a bad chip. Next up, the motherboard. We are using the ASRock B550 Phantom Gaming 4 ATX motherboard. An overall fantastic motherboard. A quick look at a couple specs, we can see that it has 4 RAM slots with a max capacity of 128 gigabytes, and a max speed of 4,533 megahertz. It also has a good variety of ports on its rear I/O. Now this part will simply hold all of the other parts together and ensure that they run at optimal performance. ASRock has always been a solid motherboard manufacturer, so I don't have any doubts that this will be a great motherboard for gaming. The RAM that we'll be putting in this motherboard is the Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro 16GB, so 2 sticks of 8GB, 3200 MHz RAM. 16GB is enough for games both old and new alike, as well as games that will be coming out in the future. It was only recently that games started recommending more than 8GB of RAM, so this set will last you a good while. The RAM is also 3200 MHz, which is the perfect speed for our Ryzen 3600, and is also going to give great frame rates versus if you were to use a lower clock speed out of RAM, like 2400 MHz for example. I of course can't forget mentioning how the set is RGB, so it'll of course spruce up your PC a good bit. Corsair is very well known for its high quality RAM, so this is easily going to be a solid, reliable set. Next up, the storage. We are using both an SSD and a hard drive for this build. For the SSD, we are using the Crucial P2 500GB M.2 solid state drive. Now since it's M.2, it's very easy to install and is a bit faster than using an internal SSD that you connect via a SATA cable. Now on this M.2 SSD is where you'll want to put games that you want fast loading times for, files you want quick access to, and of course Microsoft Windows. Now it isn't required, but I 100% recommend you put Windows on the SSD as it'll make your computer a lot more snappy. 500 gigabytes is a lot of storage, so unless you have a very large game library, this can probably be your sole storage device. If not though, not to worry, there is also a 1TB hard drive in this build, which is the Western Digital Caviar Blue 1TB 7200 RPM hard drive. This is one of the best 1TB hard drives out there. It's very popular among gamers as it is a solid, reliable piece of hardware. In addition, 1TB is a ton of storage like I said, so you can easily store a good bunch of games on this secondary storage device. I personally have 2 Western Digital Caviar Blue hard drives in my build, and they perform just great, so they're definitely my #1 choice when it comes to hard drives. And next up, the part you've probably been waiting to hear about, the video card. For this build, we are using the AMD Radeon RX 5700 XT. Now the other option was the RTX 2070, but after doing only a little bit of research, it wasn't difficult to find out that the card I chose has a much better price to performance ratio compared to the 2070, and there's really only a 6% performance difference for roughly $50. However, if you're not an AMD fan, the 2070 is still a viable option for this build and will work perfectly if you choose that over the one I chose. Anyway, the 5700 XT I chose in specific is the ASRock Radeon RX 5700 XT Challenger, overclockable with 8GB of VRAM. It has a core clock of 1650 MHz and a boost clock of 1905 MHz. Now, let's get on with the performance benchmarks. Today, we'll be talking about Rust, Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, and Modern Warfare. These were games requested by you guys. If you want to hear about different games in the next video, let me know in the comment section. Alright, starting with Fortnite at 1080p, low settings average of 300 frames per second, and high average of 136 frames per second. So it looks like no matter what graphics settings you're using, you're going to get a competitive frame rate. But most people probably aren't going to be playing at 1080p. They're going to be playing at 1440p, which is pretty much the norm nowadays. Low average of 262 frames per second and high average of 89 frames per second. So it looks like if you want to play Fortnite competitively, you're going to want to avoid high settings, probably going to want to roam around low medium settings, customize it a bit to fit whatever's best for you. Now for Rust at 1080p, low average of 135 frames per second and high average of 79 frames per second. So clearly Rust is very demanding when it comes to high settings, but playing at low, you won't have to worry about it too much. Medium will also probably run decently. Now 1440p, low average of 125 frames per second and high average of 62 frames per second. So clearly this is always going to run at above 60 frames per second, but if you're one of those people like me that can't stand 60 frames per second because you have a 144Hz monitor, then you're definitely going to want to avoid high settings, stick around the low medium setting. Now with Rainbow Six, it changes a lot. With 1080p, you get a low average of 219 frames per second and a high average of 194 frames per second. So clearly you can pretty much be on any setting and you won't have to worry about a huge frame rate difference. And at 1440p, same thing, low average of 208 frames per second and high average of 119 frames per second. So no matter what path you take, you're always going to be getting above 100 frames per second, which in my personal opinion is the best frame rate. I don't care that much for frame rates above 100, but that may be different for you. Either way, high average is still 119 frames per second, 20 above 100, so still a ton of frames. Now Modern Warfare at 1080p, a low average of 213 frames per second and high average of 175 frames per second. So very impressive for Modern Warfare, a very graphically impressive game, outputting such high frame rates. And at 1440p, low average of 171 frames per second and high average of 119 frames per second. So all across the board, really good results here. Looks like you can play Modern Warfare at pretty much any setting you'd like and still be getting above 100 frames per second by a good bit. So clearly this PC does not like to go below 100 frames per second. So if you have a high refresh rate monitor, like for example 144Hz, this is definitely the PC you'll want to be having. Next part, the case. Now you don't have to use this case, I just chose this one because it's ATX and looks really nice in my opinion. You can use any ATX case that you'd like. Anyway, I chose the Deepcool MATREXX 55V3 RGB ATX case. This is a very beautiful case as it has a glass window on both the front and side, making it the perfect case for gaming in my opinion. It also has RGB, which is a great addition. Funnily enough, I have the black version of this case, so I can vouch that it is definitely a fantastic, perfect sized, solid case of quality. Finally, the power supply. The best option is the EVGA BR 600W 80+ bronze certified power supply. It has black cable sleeves, so not to worry, there won't be any ugly rainbow colored cables. With 600 watts of 80+ bronze certified power, you're guaranteed to have 492 watts of power under 100% load, which is perfect for this PC as PC Part Picker estimates that this build will only take up 404 watts of power. It also means that there's room for upgrading, so CPU, RAM, storage, whatever it may be, you can absolutely upgrade. So that will do it for this build. If you plan on building it or have built it, let us know in the comment section, as I am sure the community would love to hear about it. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Have any comments or questions, drop a comment below and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. And if you enjoy the content you're seeing, drop a sub. Thanks for watching. Peace out.